This is a Drasha for Parshat Noach 2020. There's a story you might have heard about Chicken Little. Chicken Little one day went for a walk in the woods. And as she was walking, an acorn fell from a tree and hit her on the top of the head. "Oh my! Oh my! The sky is falling! I must run and tell the king about it," said Chicken Little. And she began to run. And she ran and she ran. And she saw her friend, Turkey Lurkey. "Where are you going?" said Turkey Lurkey. "Oh, Turkey Lurkey, the sky is falling, and I have to tell the king about it." "How do you know?" said Turkey Lurkey. "It hit me on the head, so I know it," said Chicken Little. "Let me go with you," said Turkey Lurkey. So the two of them ran, and they ran and they ran, and they met Ducky Lucky. "The sky is falling," said Turkey Lurkey. "We're going to tell the king." "How do you know that?" said Ducky Lucky. "It hit Chicken Little on the head." "May I come with you?" "Come," said Turkey Lurkey. So the three of them, they ran and they ran and they ran, and they met Foxy Loxy. "The sky's falling and we're going to go tell the king about it," said Ducky Lucky. "Do you know where he lives?" asked Foxy Loxy. "I don't," said Ducky Lucky. "Well, I don't," said Turkey Lurkey. "I don't," said Chicken Little. "Don't worry," said Foxy Loxy. "I know where the king lives. Follow me." So they all followed the fox. He led them, and they walked and they walked, and they came to a little hole in the ground. He says, "The king lives in there." So they all went into the little hole one by one, and the fox went in last, and Chicken Little and Turkey Lurkey and Ducky Lucky never came out of that hole again. The lesson of the story of Chicken Little would seem to be that being too quick to see disaster coming can actually be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we're too ready to believe the world is going to end, we wind up acting in ways that are dangerous and harmful. That is, of course, the opposite of the lesson of Parshat Noach. While Chicken Little and her friends meet an untimely end because they're too ready to believe in Chicken Little's warnings of disaster, Noach, by contrast, spent 120 years building an ark to save himself and his family from the floodwaters. And Rashi explains that Noach could have built the ark much faster, but he took 120 years hoping that people would see what he was doing and find out that it was because of God's warning that he was bringing a flood, because of the great evil of their ways, and they would then do teshuvah and change their behavior. So where Chicken Little jumps to conclusions and scares everyone around her running into disaster headlong, Noach is patient, waiting for people to come to him, taking his time, even though his predictions of doom are based on the most reliable of evidence, the direct communication from God. And where Chicken Little ironically manages to convince everyone she meets, except maybe the wily fox, Noah fails to convince anyone outside of his own family. How is it that Noah's generation were so dense, so blind that they completely ignored his warnings. And it's not just his generation. Noach is not the only unsuccessful prophet in the Bible. In fact, in his failure to convince people to change, he's much more the rule than the exception. 2 weeks from now, we will read the story of Lot, Abraham's nephew's futile attempt to convince even his own sons-in-law and daughters to leave the city of Sodom before God destroys it. In Shemot, we read how Pharaoh manages to ignore not only Moshe's warnings, but the evidence and experience of his own life that his insistence on keeping the Jews as slaves is bringing disaster upon himself and his nation. The prophet Jeremiah was thrown in prison, not by non-Jewish oppressors, but by the Jewish people themselves, because they didn't like hearing his warnings that God was going to destroy Jerusalem. And they preferred to believe the words of false prophets who offered comforting assurance that the temple could never be destroyed, that God would never allow that to happen to us. In each case, the people ignore these prophecies and are utterly destroyed. We might ask, how are people so dense, so foolish, so self-destructively optimistic? Although this kind of stubbornness shouldn't surprise anyone alive in 2020 who's seen how people can persist in believing that COVID-19 is no big deal after it has killed well over 200,000 of our fellow Americans and countless and many, many more around the world. There's an old joke about a man who's held up at gunpoint by a stranger, by a mugger. And the robber shouts, "Your money or your life?" And the man doesn't move. And the robber repeats, "Your money or your life?" And the man says, "Hold on, I'm thinking." It sounds ridiculous, but as a society, that's been our reaction to COVID-19. This disease has been shouting at us, "Your money or your life." Public health officials have been saying, "Your money or your life." And we're saying, hold on, we're thinking. In this, we are not so different from the people who heard Jeremiah or Lot or Noah or any other prophet who warned of impending disaster. It's hard to hear the words of the prophets. It's hard to believe in the reality of a disaster that tells us we have to change the way we live. We're going to have to give things up. For Noach's audience, as for so many other prophets, the only way to save their lives would have been to accept that that life as they knew it could never be the same again. And they simply weren't able or willing to do that. We have a powerful need to believe that everything is going to be okay. We believe it can't be possible that the world as we know it will end. It's much easier to imagine that those who tell us we must change or die are just hysterical Chicken Littles. After all, our God is a merciful God. He will make sure that everything will work out. And this is true. But his definition of working out is not our definition of working out. His definition of being okay in the end is not our definition of being okay in the end. We soothe ourselves with false assurances that the life we know, the society we live in, the lifestyle to which we have grown accustomed is invulnerable, is inevitable, because it is too painful and frightening to imagine that this is not the case. But believing to that degree in any human construct, whether it's the walls of Jerusalem or the Egyptian slave state or the American economy, is the definition of idolatry. We may no longer bow down to physical statues, but we believe in plenty of false gods. The truth is, nothing in this world except for God is eternal. There is no shelter in this life that is invulnerable except for God. There are no guarantees except for God. And the only way to save our lives, the only way to assure our survival, is to accept the painful truth that the things we cling to as precious and necessary are impermanent and may go away. This is not easy to do. The only time in Tanakh where a people ever listened to a prophecy of destruction and averted it by changing was when the people of Nineveh listened to Yonah, the prophet Yonah's foretelling of their destruction, and immediately declared a fast and did teshuvah. Yonah is actually the tikkun to this pattern of ignoring prophets that begins with Noach. The parallels between the stories are striking, not just because there's a prophecy of destruction which is ignored and a prophecy of destruction which is heeded, but both stories involve a boat. Both stories involve a Yonah. The prophet Yonah's name means dove in Hebrew, the bird that Noach sends out of the ark on to bring back evidence of dry land. And of course, the prophet Yonah, whose name means dove, is the end or the sign that an end to this destructive tendency to ignore prophets calling on us to do tshuva is actually possible. These stories are contrasted in the Tanakh to remind us not to be like the generation of the flood, who stopped their ears up for 120 years, but to be like the people of Nineveh, who were able to recognize the truth when they heard it and able to change without delay. What about Chicken Little? Isn't there some truth there that we shouldn't listen to every prophecy of doom? I think there is, but I don't think it contradicts this fundamental lesson of Parshat Noach, because Chicken Little is telling us not to trust everything we hear, whether it's Chicken Little saying the sky is falling, or whether it's Foxy Loxy saying, just follow me and everything will be okay. It's not just their perception of destruction that dooms Chicken Little and her friends. It's that in their panic, they believe the assurances of the first opportunist to come along, promising to help them. We must not believe everything we're told, but we have to be as skeptical of those who assure us everything is going to be all right as we are of those who warn us that things are falling apart. I pray that God blesses us and blesses all people with the wisdom to distinguish between falsehood and truth, with the vision to recognize false assurances and false warnings alike for the danger that they pose, with courage to respond and adapt appropriately to real dangers, and finally, with the faith to trust that even if things change, even if we have to give up things that we thought we needed, and who in the last year hasn't had to give up something that you thought you couldn't live without, even if we have to change so much and lose things that it is painful to lose, with God we will be okay. And in the face of threats, may we be blessed with the courage to change and to adapt to new realities so that we do not perish, but we survive and we thrive and we persist. Shabbat Shalom.